So I've worked for the California Department of Food and Agriculture for 20 years. I have, for the majority of that time, I've worked in some sort of emergency preparedness or response function. The majority of my career I've spent on foreign animal disease response planning, mainly as it relates to food animals, so livestock and poultry and things like that. People who ask me about that, you guys may be more familiar because you're agriculture and you understand things, but you know, we deal with things like bird flu, mad cow disease, those kinds of things. And so my unit still does that kind of planning and response, but we also do animals in disaster response, and we do a little bit of animal carcass disposal coordination. And so I'll go over a little bit about what my organization is responsible for. I did deliver a version of this presentation to various other groups, right? So, you know, Naomi's on, the CARTs have seen a number of these slides, CVMA, CalOES, and others. I felt like it's important. I continue to add to these slides, and I'm going to talk about some of the recent activations and some of the response that went on recently. But I also try to keep our messaging consistent. So as I present to a new group, I try to share the same message. So I'm going to talk a little bit about CDFA's Emergency Support Function 11 role and responsibility. I'll talk about our CARES program, and then I am the leader of the Animal Health Emergency Preparedness Response section. I'll talk a little bit about my section and what the roles and responsibilities are. So CDFA has several emergency management roles. A lot of it is related to coordination of state resources. Once it becomes an emergency exhausts local resources, you know, we're the next level after the county has reached out and said, hey, we need additional resources. So we do respond to the State Emergency Operations Center or a Region Emergency Operations Center if those activations are needed. We send what's called an agency rep when we are activated. We collaborate with fairs and expositions. We have a branch that oversees and has a close relationship with fairgrounds and expositions statewide. So that is another kind of responsibility. Anytime you hear of a fairground that gets activated for an emergency, whether it's an evacuation center, in some way CDFA was involved in trying to get that either activated or communicated in some way to get the mission going. We're also responsible for CARES. We coordinate with other emergency support functions and with our federal counterparts. And then obviously we represent CDFA with external stakeholders. So one of the things I want to talk about with the state emergency plan is anytime that the state activates for an emergency, we're using the state emergency plan. It's online, it's available, it's on the CalOES website. The emergency support functions are an annex to the state emergency plan. The emergency support function that CDFA is responsible for is 11, and so we are the lead agency for coordinating food and agriculture issues related as they relate to any sort of state emergency plan activation. In general, when we activate Emergency Support Function 11 or CDFA for a food and agriculture related emergency, we're doing one of these 5 bullet points here. So we're either activated for a plant disease or a pest infestation, a foreign or emerging animal disease, food and feed contamination, CARES, which I'll talk more about today, or we're activating some sort of emergency fairground for disaster support. Those are the 5 things that CDFA is responsible for during any state emergency. CDFA needs to coordinate our activation with the other emergency support functions that are outlined within the state emergency plan. So just like CalOES will activate a state agency representative from CDFA to go over to the State Emergency Operations Center, they'll do the same for other state agencies as well. So Department of General Services, social services, Cali PA, et cetera. So these are a few of, not all of, the emergency support functions that CDFA could be coordinating with when we get activated and we're in the State Emergency Operations Center. So, you know, like for instance, Caltrans would be part of ESF1 related to transportation. Cal Fire would be ESF4, fire and rescue. So that's kind of how that works. We coordinate CARES, animal care and sheltering, very closely with ESF6, which is the human care and shelter emergency support function, and Department of Social Services is the lead together with Red Cross over the ESF6 coordination. All right, so everybody asked me what is CARES, so I try to provide a brief definition here. So under the guidance and direction of CDFA, CARES is a state-level organization. It's our goal to create a robust emergency management framework. We're supposed to be integrating all levels of government and non-governmental entities, and we're trying to model a mutual aid system for especially response and recovery, but also, you know, mitigation, preparedness, et cetera. So here's a little bit more about what the expectations of the program are. So the goal is to create a comprehensive mutual aid system of resources throughout the state. Mutual aid to us means that you have trained, credentialed, well-exercised, something that's more like a universal responder with comparative capabilities. And basically, in order to be able to activate resources from other counties and try to get everybody to work together, you kind of need to have people who are trained and everybody is doing the same thing. So when you ask for a shelter operator, you know what you're getting whenever the person arrives. So that's the goal. There is an expectation on a state level that CDFA provide guidance on animal evacuation, mass care, and sheltering during emergencies. Our program is right in the middle of relaunching what used to be a steering committee over CARES. We're probably going to move towards a stakeholder committee now, where we use a committee of various stakeholders throughout the state and validate existing guidance or, you know, develop new guidance. Also, we want the CARES committee to agree and adopt some sort of standardization for response positions and capabilities. I do want to say this is well underway. Many of the CARTs and everybody else have, even there's FEMA resource typing out there. A lot of this organization is well underway. We just want to kind of bring it into the CARES stakeholder umbrella so that we're kind of standardizing things for some of the other counties who may not have started or are as mature in their planning as some of the other counties. But many of our counties are very mature, and a lot of organizations are very mature in this area. The goal with CARES is really, we don't want to try to fix what's working. We really want to focus on the gaps. We don't want to interrupt already existing agreements that organizations already have with their local governments. So the way that things have been working up till now is the same way that we expect it to work when CDFA engages in CARES. We also want to work with Cal OES and, you know, like members of fire service, you know, the ESF4 people, to set standards. And so this is just one example, but there needs to be a set of knowledge, skills, and abilities or some sort of credentialing for those entities that are both equipped and trained to, you know, go behind the fire lines and evacuate animals, for instance, because that requires special equipment, special knowledge, and special coordination with whoever's running the incident, which is, you know, likely Cal Fire or, you know, somebody on the federal side. One of the things I do want to say is there are a ton of materials that are already available on the CalCARES website. This website was recently just adopted, and CDFA is just starting to take it over, and we'll be kind of updating it and adding to this website. But the CARES Steering Committee from a few years ago has already, members of those committee work groups have developed a lot of materials. There's response plans, there's forms, there's lots of already existing good practices and materials available on the website. And so I always try to let everyone know that those materials are there. So I'd say probably the largest portion of CARES authority comes out of Government Code Section 8608, which basically directs CDFA to oversee the CARES program development and to maintain an MOU with Cal OES to incorporate CARES into SEMS. So we do have an existing MOU with Cal OES, and we work closely with them as a partner agency. The MOU says that we'll develop responder roles and responsibilities and incorporate those into our plans. We'll support local government planning, document resource needs, and develop some sort of resource identification and tracking system. It also says that we'll integrate stakeholders into CARES planning preparedness, and during response, we'll provide technical expertise and support to CARES resource deployments. It also, the MOU directs us to work with Cal OES to propose and maintain funding to carry out the MOU. So now I want to get a little bit into response here. So as far as the scope of what we're responsible for, we kind of limit the CARES current mission to livestock service and companion animals. And that really means that like exotics, wildlife, zoos will probably not fall within the CDFA scope, even though we know that best practices that are applied to livestock service and companion animals are probably good practices for those other animal groups. There are other entities that help, right? So Department of Fish and Wildlife is essential when we're dealing with any sort of wildlife. And then, you know, zoos already have their own kind of zoo readiness initiatives, ZAP Fusion Center, those kinds of things. So we have done and partnered with zoos before, like Flew in the Zoo. We've done some of their exercises and things like that. But just to get our arms around CARES initially, we kind of limited our mission to livestock service and companion animals. We're also trying to use the standardized emergency management system. That's the standard, that's what Cal OES teaches, and that's what's in government code in California. So that just means that disasters begin locally, and when they project that they've exhausted their resources, then they move up to the next 7th level. So when the county is overwhelming their resources, then they can move up to the region or to the state and request resources. So that's how we anticipate being requested, and that's usually the way things go down pretty consistently. This just says that the CARES program encompasses preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, and prevention. So when we're not actually responding to emergency, we are doing some level of preparedness, prevention, or mitigation. And our core, you know, the CARES core functions are really evacuation, transportation, sheltering, care, veterinary care, feeding, and reunification of impacted animals with their owners. So we see that as being the core mission of CARES during response. Let me go back one here. So this is just, an example that I pulled out of one of the SEMS guidance documents from the Cal OES website. It's a little bit convoluted, but you can see the disaster area here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but the little circle there, the little drawn circle shows you the disaster area, and local government is impacted. They have resource needs, so they request the operational area. In SEMS terminology, operational area typically means the county, and so the local government requests resources from the county. The county then requests resources from the region. The region requests resources from the state or from specific state agencies. The region can also request resources from unaffected counties throughout the state. So there's 3 regions, administrative regions that Cal OES oversees. There's a southern region, an inland region, and a coastal region. And those operational areas could get resource requests from the impacted areas. So this is really how the mutual aid system is supposed to work in California. And it's pretty closely how it did work recently. So during the recent fires, this is kind of a depiction of how CDFA was activated recently. You know, the county identified their needs for resources related to animals and disasters. That need went up to the Regional Emergency Operations Center, which is staffed by Cal OES. The region searches for mutual aid in surrounding counties. At the same time, like simultaneously, they're activating state agencies who may be able to fill those requests. So the state level activation had CDFA activated to the State Emergency Operations Center. And then at that point, once we receive activation and we have a mission request to work on, then CDFA begins searching for and coordinating the resources to fill the need. When we get a mission, so that's a mission task or a mutual aid request, those are specific terms that Cal OES uses for the actual direction from them. They're tasking us, CDFA, to do something on behalf of, you know, the county or whatever. When we receive a specific mission or a request, we, you know, identify the specific detailed needs. So we may need to go back to the county or whoever's requesting assistance to ask additional questions. We also try to talk to the county or the region about what steps have already been taken, meaning, you know, have they already called resources in their area? Have these people already been called? And then after we've identified those two things, then we can begin actually contacting the resources. We tend to see resource requests come in about 3 different kinds of categories. They're either requesting some sort of veterinary professional, an emergency management professional, or an animal care, like a shelter responder, or it could be like a transporter for evacuations. And then once the potential resources have been identified, then we can provide the detailed fill information back to the point of contact, whether that go back to the Region Emergency Operations Center or directly to the county who requested the assistance. So these are the types of resource requests that we're aware of or that we get on a consistent basis when we receive a request for helping animals in disasters. So they're asking for things like transporters, so somebody who might have livestock trailers or, you know, cages or temporary fencing or something like that. They may ask for animal donations management. If there's a large amount of donations coming into the county, there could be a need for warehousing or personnel to run a warehouse or, you know, things like that. We get requests for animal control officers, shelter operation managers, animal care and handling staff, personnel who can just work in the shelters feeding animals. Also, we get requests for people to help feed shelter-in-place animals, which means that they would need to go into wherever the animals are being housed to help to feed those animals that were left behind shelter-in-place. Sometimes they request like janitorial or some sort of like cleaning needs for the shelter, veterinary care, and then sometimes the county needs help just with incident management. So they may need an emergency manager to go into their emergency operations center and help them drive the animal disaster. So these are the things that CDFA can provide during a response. Our personnel as a state agency, we can coordinate with non-governmental organizations, animal control officers, veterinary professionals, other volunteers for resource deployments for CARES. We track resource deployments, we coordinate situation information related to CARES, and we can also coordinate limited procurements for consumables. Sometimes we can, you know, purchase feed or veterinary medical supplies, depending on the circumstance. We also have some technical expertise related to carcass disposal, but carcass disposal is not generally considered part of a CARES mission, but it is something that we coordinate really closely with Cal EPA and other regulatory agencies on, just because we do that for foreign animal disease events quite often. So here's some capabilities that CDFA currently does not have. right? So CDFA does not have veterinary practitioners. We don't have trained shelter workers. We don't actually own any transport vehicles. And we can't take care of non-CDFA responder per diems and hotel accommodations. So the majority of CARES resources exist at the local level with animal control and non-governmental organizations. CDFA does employ a small staff of veterinary professionals, but their responsibilities are really regulatory activities. So they can serve as technical experts and subject matter experts on animal care and welfare during disasters, but during the course of their normal work, they're not equipped to perform hands-on veterinary practitioner work. They don't necessarily have the equipment or the supplies needed to do that. They also don't, they don't receive, like baseline testing or anything that would be required for them to perform veterinary practitioner work. So those personnel on our staff who maintain licensing and are equipped to perform veterinary practitioner work, we encourage them to volunteer with an organization like a CART or, CAVMERC, the California Veterinary Medical Response Corps, so that they can be part of a team that can deploy as a resource, as a volunteer resource. So these are the three primary roles that we see CDFA responders working in when we get activated for CARES. So there's a CARES representative role, which we activated recently, and it worked really well. That person actually serves in an EOC somewhere. So it could be our Department Operations Center, the State Operations Center, it could be at the Regional Emergency Operations Center. But that person is really working with non-governmental organizations or other teams and resources, working with other county resources to deploy personnel to meet resource needs as they come up out of the counties. The second position that we can see having a role would be a CARES coordinator. This person would be sort of one of our field personnel, maybe a livestock inspector or something that serves kind of as a roaming field shelter evaluator. Sometimes we need eyes and ears on the incident down at the ground level, and we need, there's information that's being requested of CDFA all the time during an emergency. They want to know animal counts at the different shelters. They want us to know how many shelters are open, how many of them are small animal versus large animal. There's a lot of questions being asked, especially as the state is trying to assess the damage from the incident. They're trying to identify how the demographics and how much of the population has been impacted. And one of the ways they do that is by asking state agencies to report in a lot of statistics. But often because the county and the local, personnel are busy actually responding, they don't necessarily have the time to receive phone calls from us to give us the information that's being requested. So in order to reduce that burden, this CARES coordinator can be somebody who we can send out to kind of survey the situation, get us information back so that we can kind of, quote unquote, feed the beast, the information that they're requesting. And in addition, this person can serve to help assess any resource needs or any gaps so that we can get those covered through, integration either back through the county EOC or, requesting state assets to help. And the third role that CARES, somebody from CDFA could perform would be like an incident management team or like command and general staff. That would mean that we would, at a county's request, go in and help to co-manage the incident, whether that be in unified command or just help out in operations, whatever is needed by the county. But if it's a larger catastrophic event, like say the Camp Fire, where the response is overwhelming, this is a need. I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time, this CARES, command and general staff role is not needed. The counties take care of everything on their own, and everybody, all they need is a little bit of resource coordination from us, but they don't necessarily need us to come in and help manage. But if they did, this is a capability that we're preparing to perform. These are the levels of activation that we see for CARES. I provided you my slides, so I'm not going to read over all this information. You're welcome to share my slides with anybody you'd like. But I did want to say that during the recent fires, we activated to a level 2 here. And for us, that means that we are coordinating resource deployments from throughout the state. Naomi mentioned at the beginning of our call that, she was really happy to get a call from, CDFA related to the fires. And that's what we were doing. We activated a representative to represent CARES, and that person was responsible. We got 2 mission tasks. One was from Solano County and the other was from Monterey County. And it was CDFA's responsibility to shop throughout the state and try to identify resources to deploy to those 2 missions. And we were successful in doing that in large part due to the help of our carts. So I just wanted to make a plug that what we've outlined here for our CARES activation, it's working. Our plan is working, and we actually got a good opportunity to test it recently. I want to end my talk today with just talking a little bit about pandemic planning. So CDFA is putting out some COVID-19 guidance for sheltering, and these are really just the highlights of that, right? So human shelter strategies will impact the pet shelter strategies. We're anticipating there being reduced staffing in the shelters to conserve resources and, provide relief staff in case, people get exposed. We also feel like there's going to be extra space needed in the sheltering in order to accommodate both, social distancing and allow for one or more isolation and quarantine areas. We feel like shelter intake and screening may need to be elevated, as well as, just implementing the regular guidance of, hand hygiene and elevated C&D for high touch areas and things like that. So we are encouraging anybody who's opening a shelter, especially fairgrounds and things like that, to coordinate PPE needs and basically all their resource needs through the County Emergency Operations Center. And I think that's it for me.